one of the things that is a stigma is that if you go to a treatment place right down the street and the same guy you arrested or whatever is right there in the same group as you, who wants to really talk, right?
Welcome to Elevate, the gathering spot for first responders, their families, and the communities that support them. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Elevate podcast. I'm super glad that you could join us today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, of course. And during this message and during this interview, if you hear something that someone else that you know needs to hear, don't forget to share it and send that to them so they can get the content as well. I'm here with Steve Bisson, right?
That's it.
That's it, yeah. So it reads Bison, but he says you can say it that way since you're American. No. So Steve Bisson is my guest today, and we're going to talk about the critical stress debriefing situations that often first responders are faced with, and some of the good things about it, some of the pitfalls about it, and he's gonna dive deep into that. Steve, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about yourself and how you intertwine with the first responder world.
My name is Steve Bisson, and I'm born and raised in Montreal. Came here in 1999 in Massachusetts because couldn't get a job up in Montreal, and that's a whole story for a different day. But was able to get my master's while I was here. I fell in love, had 2 kids, now divorced, but still love my kids, and became an American citizen because I love it so much here. So that's a little bit about how I got here as far as my job is concerned. In 1999, I started in a group home, went to a crisis team, and ever since I worked on a crisis team in 99 or so, I've been interfacing with first responders. And when I say about interfacing with first responders, the crisis team, we in Massachusetts, we have something called a Section 12 that we have to complete if someone is suicidal, homicidal, or lacking judgment. So after that, we would end up, I would end up on working in the jail, people who are correctional officers. And to me, correctional officers are first responders, frankly.
Absolutely.
My ER people are first responders. And then we started the jail diversion program, which has become the co-response model in Framingham, Massachusetts. I was part of the first few clinicians involved, which was really cool. And we rode along with the police officers. We were making sure that if someone had a mental health issues, instead of sending him to jail, getting him to treatment. So that's how I started there, went to parole, worked with probation, and started my own private practice about 12 years ago. And right now, about 50% of my caseload is first responders of some kind. In addition, I work as a CIT trainer. I know I did the co-response model, but I'm a CIT trainer for mental health, substance use, do trauma once in a while, do suicide once in a while, do developmental disabilities, and psychotropic medication as an education for the first responders. And I've also started 2 drug courts, and that's it. I don't have any other connection whatsoever.
Well, that's enough, and we talked about this on our pre-call, is that, when it comes to first responders and the support of first responders, the first responders, I also include first responders who support first responders as first responders per se. You're there on the front lines with them at times. You deal with them. You understand their world. A lot of us first responders, we want to know that people are there and they know what we've been through. And even though I don't believe that you've ever been a firefighter, paramedic, police officer, but you've been entrenched in their system for so long, and in the correction side, it's one of those things where the people that support us and have spent the majority of their career with us, I feel still are part of us because they are the first responders for us. When we need it, they're responding first to help us.
You're not going to ever hear an argument out of me because I really think that who's helping the helper has always been something that we talk about in the mental health world. Well, I've been talking about it since the beginning, who's helping our first responders. And, it's not trauma number 1. It's usually trauma number 27, although some bigger ones could occur.
Of course.
But at the end of the day, who's there for them? And you need someone who's culturally competent, who's been there, done that, and not asking, what's roll call?
Or, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or what is a call? Like, what is a run? Because different parts of the country have different terms for their calls. Like, what's a squad? What's a rig? Like everybody, in my area, they call ours the medic, but other places they call them the squad. But then there's a rig, and a lot of times the rig, some places it refers to the medic ambulance. and sometimes it refers to the fire engine. So it's one of those things where ladder, at some places ladder is a different term or than it is in others, or a quint. It's funny how, squad car. I mean, every different part of the country has their nuances, of course.
I think that that's the stuff that I don't need to be explained.
Yeah.
The cultural competence, and I know that I talked about it a little bit with you pre-interview. And the other part too is to get more people in my field to be more acquainted to it. Is we gotta let them in once in a while to the fire station, the police station. Again, within normal limits, right? I'm not
Right,
stupid
right.
either. I think that that's the other part too that leads to having a lot of people struggle with mental health counselors who don't know necessarily are not culturally competent. Well, if you don't let them in, how are they going to get culturally competent?
Right. Now, are you a counselor, or what is your title when it comes to the mental health realm?
Massachusetts, I'm considered a licensed mental health counselor,
Okay.
which means I have a master's in counseling psychology, and I did 2 years of blah blah blah, and they gave me a license after I did the test.
Gotcha.
But I've worked in Vermont, in rural Vermont, where I was a licensed clinical mental health counselor. They all have different names, but it's the same.
Gotcha. Same thing.
Worked in courts up there. So
Right, right. And I'm not a trainer in the CIT, but I did go and take the CIT, the week-long CIT course where we had multiple people come in, and we had counselors, we had ex-police, we had ex-firefighters come in and do all the training. It was great training. I recommend CIT training to anyone. It was mainly focused towards the incident itself, not so much for us, but a lot of it still carries over. If you think about it a different way as you're taking the content in, you can apply the same the same principles to us or to your fellow first responders. So talk a little bit more about the critical stress debriefing situations that you've been a part of, and when it comes to some of the good things about it, and share with us, because I had a couple of there was one time when I've had a couple in my career, and one of the biggest ones I had, there was something I probably should I wish I would have never heard about what one person shared, but it's still their grief process, their filtering process. But talk to me a little bit about how things have changed over the years with the debriefing, instead of it just being suck it up, buttercup.
well, I think that when we first started, I was trained in 2009, I think 2008, around there. I can't remember exactly. And what it was a lot at the time is that we took care of, here's the mental health guy, he's going to help you with the mental health stuff. The thing they lacked at the time is they didn't have the steps. They had like, okay, we're going to bring them in the room. We're going to put safety at the doors, basically. People can talk if they want to. People don't talk if they don't want to. And it was, I'm not saying that my training was not like that, but there's a lot of people who told me their training was, yeah, anyone wants to start, or there was no education. There was nothing being done. Now there's a lot more education. This is what happens when people have a stress issue, or they see something that's traumatic and an event like that. So I think that what they've done is they've started to put a little more things around it, because even when I first started, I remember one of my first ones I was in the lead. I was just a guy on the side, so to speak. And someone said, I know you guys went through a lot. Anyone want to say anything and talk? They said,
Nope.
okay, the donuts and the coffee is in the back. So I think that you're just adding the education component now about what it looks like, what this could be. And, they used to not want to give too much of the incident, because then they're saying, well, we're putting ideas in their head. But no, we got to share what the idea is. It's the stupidity that we've always carried, that, oh, we can't talk about it.
Mm.
It's like saying, don't ask someone who's suicidal if they're suicidal. No, we actually have to.
Have to. Yeah, that studies have shown you have to ask them. Yep.
I think that what happened is we've changed a little bit of how it's conducted, and we talk about the incident as objectively as someone can, because there's no such thing as objectivity, as you know. And from there, we start letting people talk. Now, I've also seen critical incident stress debriefings come up like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after the event. How many people really want to be there?
Yeah, nobody, because they've already compartmentalized it, unfortunately, or they pushed it down where they shouldn't be pushing it down, or realizing where they need help. I know when I had my big incident, it was one of those things where we all went around the room. It was a very safe place. They did a little bit of education, explained why we should talk about this, and I do remember that part. And each person gave their own story of the incident, and of course, one of the people was the firefighter who found the family and each one of the family members, and unfortunately, he explained what he saw, unfortunately, and that was the part that I probably shouldn't have heard. Then it got to me, and they probably, I knew when I got off the truck, the first person I saw was someone I knew from high school, and she's the one that called 911. And so when I told everybody in the room that, it was like this, oh my God, like you actually know the family, or not the people in the house. I didn't know them, but then fast forward a couple hours when I went back home, my daughter did know the little girl that was in the house. And then that's where it really spiraled for me, because now it's too close to home. It's affecting my daughter. It's affecting me. It's affecting my friends. I had friends of mine that knew the family. I didn't know that until later. We went to the funeral and all that. And I saw all these people that knew this family that was intertwined with me and my family. And I'm happy for the debriefing. The parts of the debriefing that helped was knowing that I could raise my hand again later for help. And what do you talk about when it comes to after the debriefing and when someone needs help? How do you interject someone to say, hey, if you have more issues with this, or if you just want to talk about this, like, how do you set that up?
For me, how I've done it is, after the event, I've never been a lead, so I'll be perfectly honest. I've always been the interceptor. I call it the interceptor. Like if people run away, trying to intercept the ball.
Tackle them.
About football earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I think that being the interceptor, I've also I don't want to hear this. I'm like, that's great. It's okay for you to say that. And usually what I did is I did the psychoeducation part. No one wants to really rehear a story sometimes. And for some other people, it helps to hear it. But everyone's different. That's why there's different type of therapy. There's different type of people. It can be formal or informal. So when I did a lot of CISM, like as much as I'm a therapist and, take insurance and all that fun stuff, a lot of guys I would grab after, like, look, how about we just grab a coffee in a couple of weeks, just see how you're doing? And usually it was within a week. I say a couple of weeks, usually within a week. And I go, hey, how you doing? Not so good, good. And then we talked about options. And I think that for me, the other part of the critical incident stress management that's changed, that you can intercept later, so to speak, and be able to do the psychoeducation. I've hung around with the donuts and the coffee. Sometimes when it says LMHC or mental health counselor, I see all the first responder go, he's going to put me in a hospital, so I'm not going to talk to him. So I think that's changed. We no longer have that name. And when people ask me my specialty, I just say, I work with crisis. That's what I do. And so it really helped to change a little bit of that stigma. But obviously, the stigma is also carried by the departments. You talk about that stuff is that, I did a debriefing after the Boston Marathon bombings. And there's a couple of officers that told me, I'm not talking to you. No, this is confidential. I can't share anything. It's like, no, but they'll know that I talked to you. They'll know that. They'll know that. And then they're going to take away my badge. They're going to take away my gun. There was this big stigma in regards to that. As much as we say it beforehand, they're like, yeah, you have to say that. And ultimately, changing that stigma has been very helpful. We have, chiefs of police, fire departments, sheriffs that are very understanding of it. Some of them aren't. Being truthful here. Now, if you think I'm being a jerk.
And that's the part that needs to change. We need to have the upper management has to be okay with, to save their own kind. They need to be okay with people needing to raise their hand or get help in whatever form that they want. That's one thing that you said before too that kind of stuck out in my mind is that there's options now. There's a lot of options now compared to even 20 years ago. It's not always about talk therapy. Yes, I feel you need a professional to help guide you through the system, but that doesn't mean that it's sit on a couch and tell me your life story. There's other things that you can, that someone who knows and has options, they hear about what your situation is. They suggest some things that could help in a different way than talk therapy. And, what have you seen in the years that you've been doing this when it comes to options and how options have presented themselves? What did you used to have compared to what we have now?
Interestingly enough, I think we still don't have enough resources, but that's probably a different debate for a different day. What I've seen now is there's more and more places that are specialized in working with first responders. One of the things that is a stigma is that if you go to a treatment place right down the street, and the same guy you arrested or whatever is right there in the same group as you. Who wants to really talk, right? Or you had a bad encounter with them or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You saved them from an OD and you're a firefighter and you're sitting there and the guy who you just saved from and believe me, I know that story. And they can't talk, but now they've started first responder groups, first responder intensive outpatient practices, 15-day programs. There's less of a stigma to attend to those. And what I really like is that if you want to do outpatient, you can do outpatient, you can do intensive outpatient, you can do partial hospitalization, go to hospitals, all first responder guided, oriented. And we're lucky in Massachusetts. There's a couple of places I can name that are actually run by former police, fire, or sheriff people. I think that that's also the change in the shift that you've seen because, as much as I consider myself a first responder and a half, I can't take the full honor of the first responder. There's something about talking to a mental health counselor that's still a little stigmatic for people. And I get that. Having another cop who's been there, done that, and happens to be a therapist, now that's changed the game for a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think that that's not only we have more options, I think there's a lot of the stigma that's come with it. We treat them differently in a good way, not in a bad way. And there's ways to have, badge meetings if you're into AA or type of support like that. And that really didn't exist maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to, the process of the options that we do have, and normalizing, the stigma that stigma almost has a stigma to it now. The word stigma has a stigma that I've seen. And I've started using different terminology. We want to normalize the conversation. So this isn't, faux pas to talk about or to be a part of. And I believe that part of that would be my whole goal as I move forward through this process and as I get further and further into meeting people like yourself and meeting others that I have come on the Elevate podcast is get to the point where we can get this into the educational system of the first responders. So your academies, your EMS programs, and start this conversation at the beginning. And it's going to take a while for it to normalize that way, but not, I've had it before where I've put together some things and nobody showed up. Nobody once said, hey, yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you want to talk about our mental health. No, I was lucky enough a month ago in my department, we decided to make a mental health introduction discussion and present it to the whole entire department. But they didn't have to come because we came to them and they get monthly training and they pretty much have to just stay there for it. And it ended up being really good because people opened up. It wasn't like they opened up and started crying or anything like that or started talking about major issues, but it started to normalize the conversation. And everybody, when I got done, okay, guys, I always ask, what did you think about that training? Everybody think it was needed, appropriate, and every single person I trained over 33 people in my portion of the process. There's 33 per day in all these different stations and 6 of us that train it. So we train over 100 people in this and the firefighters that come in to listen to the lectures as well. So there's probably more like 200 people that got this training, and not one person ever said that they didn't like to hear that we're trying to normalize this. And it was good. It was really good. I can't wait for the next one that'd be a little bit more in depth. And I think that's the start. If you're out there trying to figure out how to start a program, start it by a simple, just educational lecture on the low level of things, not super deep, you don't have to dive into the ACEs score and dive into how the brain works. Eventually, that's what you want to get to because that's all part of it. But just the sprinkle in what your support is, what you have in your system, what you have in your insurance areas. That's another big thing is our insurance is changing and it needs to change more. Talk a little bit about that. You mentioned earlier that you are a licensed counselor that takes insurance. One thing I've found is like my insurance company, they will give me certain mental health systems. But then when I called to say, hey, I want to try this, but it costs money and I want to use my flexible spending account, they're like, no, we won't approve that until it's authorized by a primary physician. And I'm like, wait a second, this is my money. This is my decision. This is where I feel like I'm going to have the best, help, but you don't want to cover it for me or you don't want to give me back my money to pay for it. So talk a little bit about the struggles or maybe some changes that you've seen on the insurance side since you do use insurance.
I'll address that. I just wanted to mention, I forgot peer support. within the departments. I like the CISM, but when having a CISM with a peer support group, perfect, because that really helps people. I just want to mention that because
Yep.
I think that's developing a lot more, and that's a good thing. But there's not one treatment that's the end all, that be all. So that's why I want to mention that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, no, the problem with the insurance companies is exactly what you talked about. It's like, oh, it's got to be approved by your primary care. You only get 12 sessions. We've been repressing 20 years of trauma, but 12 sessions should fix you. Uh, and then the other part too is that if you make people run through hoops, and here in the Northeast, the other challenge you have is because how insurance are now done, a $3,500 deductible. And, that's a lot of money for someone who is a police officer. Yeah, you can look at all the lists and say, oh, some people make a lot of money, but the police officers aren't paying all that well, right? First responders in general, frankly.
Right.
Oh, I think that what happens is that you get, the financial barrier, get 14 referrals for 12 weeks. And then how do you know the person behind you, the mental health counselor, is competent? And that's the other part that's really hard. The part with the insurance companies too is that, and I'm not going to name names, but I have a company that if I do a whole hour with anyone, it doesn't matter who it is, paid a whole $105. And then I have another one that pays $140. And then sometimes they'll be like, yeah, we're taking our money back. And they don't really explain why. They just take their money back. So for those who take insurance, also have to live with that constant fear of that happening. And how much is it worth? My out-of-pocket expense, my out-of-pocket for someone who comes in is $160. But I know that's what I think I'm worth, but there's no insurance company that pays me that. So I think that the other you find is less and less therapists who are competent actually take insurance. I won't change unless, a lot of things change. But for me, just because I want to work with first responders, I leave that option open. But a lot of people have that issue. And then by the time you get to the office, what I find is that a lot of people don't know how to act. Oh, there's a guy who asked me recently, he's like, so do I lie on the couch? I'm like, if you want to, I care.
Are you going to fall asleep? You stop moving. First responders are so busy at times. If I lay on a couch, I'm out. You know what I mean? I don't, I'm like, you probably better just let's go walk around the block and talk because then I'm awake.
The other part too is that, you talked about, expectations. I'm working on a project right now to work on it. I've been asked, am I supposed to cry? What to? I don't fucking know.
You don't have to do anything,
And so I think that that's the other part that you have is the medical system also has put on a stigma with the insurance companies and don't normalize the process. I really don't care personally. I'll treat someone until they need treatment. And if the insurance gives me a hard time, I don't really care anymore. But the problem is that, we all have to pay bills. We all have to do that. And finding the time, if someone's doing they're working second shift and you only have second shift openings for them, then it's finding a therapist that has the opening.
Right.
And so you got a lot of barriers that get there that just discourages people. And then when people hear about 12 weeks, and they tell me, I've been in this field for 20 something years. You think 12 weeks is going to do it? Of course I won't. I think that plays a big factor too.
Right. Exactly. You mentioned something about, competent therapists and just, I won't throw anybody under the bus, but I had to fire a therapist once when I was going through possible divorce. And my second session, I was like halfway through the session when he said to me what he said, I was like, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. I'm never coming back because I'm here to save my marriage, not try to talk me into how a new life could happen without my marriage. I'm still very much wanting to save everything about my family and my marriage. And until I'm not, I don't want you to basically start the conversation of how awesome it's going to be to have every other weekend. I'm like, that won't be awesome for me. I know it. That's going to tear me apart. I am a family guy, and I just didn't listen to signs and symptoms as my marriage got further and further. And now I'm in a situation where I want help trying to fix it. And so he's like, really? You're firing me? And I'm like, yep. I'm like, we're done.
So many I've had people come in and they tell me that they go to first responder therapists. Like, well, why don't you just leave it at work and come home? Oh, I
Well,
didn't
that's
think
not a first responder therapist.
exactly. Like, oh, I didn't think of
Like,
that.
yeah, if they ever say that, if any of you ever go to therapy and anybody says, why can't you just drop it off at home or drop it off at work? Like it goes both ways. Just drop home off at home and be present for your work, and drop work off at work and be present at home. It doesn't work that way, because one of the big things that I like to train people on and talk to people about and be upfront about is it's not just what we see when we're on the front lines. It's also our family life affects it. Our away from our children affects it. Our finances affect it. Our house breaking down inevitably when we're on duty affects it. My wife was pregnant. I think she was 7.5 months pregnant, and her car broke down on the side of the road in the middle of July. And thank God my in-laws were retired and they could go get her. But I get a phone call and I'm at work and I just can't leave. We have staffing, and I mean, it was okay. Let's figure out who we can have come get you up. And she's like, can't you just come get me? I'm like, no, it's not like that. I don't have an office job, babe. And she's, and she deals with her own stuff because she's a nurse, and that whole stuff that they hear and see on their front lines is also another. I kind of clump, like you said, the ER people or the frontline nurses that deal with patients or even triage, in a doctor's office. I mean, there's some incredible stories that come out of that as well that are damaging, just like dispatchers aren't first responders. Hello, wait, what? I just had a dispatcher on the Elevate podcast, and we talked all about the traumas that they got because they could never get closure. They never got the final answer, and unless a police officer or a medic or a firefighter came to them and said, hey, by the way, I realized that you were the call taker, and this is what happened, what I found out later on. So so it's one of those things where we just normalizing this conversation is where it has to be. This is where it needs to be really embraced, and normalize the conversation and not hold it against people. The upper echelons can't hold it against us. They're probably, the problem is the upper echelons, they're probably dealing with their own stuff, you know what I mean? And they don't want to admit it, and that's part of the problem. Like, we don't need, I truly feel that the toughest I've ever been is when I've raised my hand when I need help. I've never been tougher. I mean, I've squared up against, my best friend is 6'4", 280, and I squared right up against him one day because I didn't like something he was dealing with, and I got my butt whooped. And that wasn't as hard as it was to stand up against what was happening internally to me later on in life.
I think that's what there's so many things you said that makes perfect sense. My good friend, who's a sergeant here in Massachusetts, he's Sergeant Jay Ball. He says all the time, you don't need bars in order to be a leader.
Right.
Being a leader includes mental health.
Yeah.
Oh, you talk about that stuff. It takes bravery. There's so many guys I met on my podcast on finding your way through therapy, and women obviously have said to me, the bravest thing I ever did is I need help, or I need to stop. Something to that effect. And I just had one on my podcast talk about her experience in the UK in regards to that. End of the day, I think that the dispatch don't get the respect they deserve sometimes, because sometimes they're told, well, remember, you're a civilian. If there's a gunshot, there's a big noise or something like that happens while you're on the call, and then the phone drops, affects them as much as the person that's right there on the front line. So I'm treated that way.
Yeah, one of the first dispatchers I ever spoke to when I started my putting together my system, he shared with me his very first day, and I've gotten permission to share this story. I won't, of course, say names, but he's given me permission to speak openly about it, and so people understand what they go through. His training was listening to calls. That was part of their training. One of the calls they listened to was the school, one of the school shootings. So that's just listening to it has to be traumatic. He was like, Kyle, it was awful. It was awful. And then he gets out of training, and his very first day on his solo flight per se, he's behind a phone and his computer screen for the first time by himself with no trainer, and he gets a suicidal person who ends up pulling the trigger on the phone with him. And he says, I wake up in the middle of the night, I hear it, and I'm like, are you talking about it with anybody? He's like, no, not really. So it's one of those things where just me talking to him about it and knowing his story, and then when I see him or I touch base with him because he's still, he's still part of our system, I always say, man, how you doing? You can, if you're having struggles, don't hesitate, reach out to me. I'm here. I'm not saying I'm the one that's going to help you, but I just need you to know that I'm a safe person. And he's like, oh man, I really appreciate that. And I know that it's deeply appreciated because he came back to me even weeks later and was like, Kyle, that day you talked to me was really, really beneficial to me. And he's a young guy. He's getting ready to start a family, just got married. He's got a kid on the way.
Hear you. I'm sorry. It's been about 30 seconds. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry.
Okay. I was on mute that whole time. I don't think 30 seconds you didn't hear me?
You're talking about the dispatcher and you see him once in a while and all
Yeah.
that. So I
Okay.
just
Yeah,
wanted
it
to leave
probably.
you off.
Sure. No, I think what happened is when I think I hit my space bar and it muted me for that last part. So I'll edit that out. But yeah, so he basically the dispatcher said that he you know just me talking to him that one day and giving him that I'm a safe person to speak to is enough for now, and someone that he can come to and call on. So, and if he has issues later in his career, I hope he does. I want anybody to be able to reach out. I'm not saying that I can fix the problem, but I can be there and be supportive through the process and guide to different things that can be very effective. So, speak a little bit more about what you do when it comes to your podcast. When we'll wrap things up. So your podcast and what it's about. I know I'm going to be a guest on your podcast, so I can't wait to be on your podcast and hear the questions you have for me. And then also too, like, what else do you do when it comes to public speaking or anything like that?
Yes, thank you. So my podcast is called Finding Your Way Through Therapy. And the whole goal of the podcast, you can hear the intro, but ultimately what I want people to think of mental health as much as physical health. You go see a mental
Mm,
health counselor once a year, you're good. Go home, you're fine. Just do your thing. CMO, maybe I need a little support for a couple of weeks or whatever. Great. You call them when you need it. All my first responders know. You call them, like if they stop seeing me, which is great because they're doing good, always call me back for treatment if they ever need it again. And most
mhm,
of them check in with me about once a year. Hey, everything's good, or I got promoted, or whatever's going on. They share that with me. And the goal of the podcast, not just for first responders, it's for everyone, is to normalize that mental health is as important as physical health. And I have all
mm,
different types of guests. You're on because at least once a month I have some sort of first responder presentation. Like I said, I've had dispatch, fire, police, um, versus all and everything in between, basically, that I can't even think about right now. And the goal is really to change the mental health stuff. As far as what I do, I do enjoy my CIT trainings, and I do those regularly for the Middlesex County up here in Massachusetts. Shout out to them. I like to use real life examples for that too. So, I don't do much public speaking unless people tell me to. Done that a couple of times. I've been invited to police departments to kind of just educate about mental health in the way I can, versus mental health is blah, 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 according to the CMR definition APA. I just talk about it the way I do. And I talk about my experience, whether it was in jail, whether it is police department on a call after a fire or suicide, which, you talked about the dispatcher. In a week of my job at the crisis team, someone called and said, hey, I have a gun to my head. What are you going to do about it? So, yeah,
mm,
you learn a baptism by fire. He's alive, by the way.
good,
Um,
good, good.
so, just spoiler. But yeah, I do that and working on a couple of projects, especially with first responders. If anyone's interested, always contact me through my website or through any of my platforms as Instagram, Facebook. I do X, LinkedIn. I'm available because I'm worked on I did 67 across the country just to see what are the stressors for mental health people in the first responder world. I'm doing another one so that we can educate therapists a little better about how to do it, because the things that I find is difficult is a lot of therapists show up in their suit and tie And
Mm.
if you want a first responder to shut down, wear a suit and tie.
Wear a suit and tie. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, because, it's one of those things where, what I've found through the years of just regular EMS training medical stuff is it's way better. I've been in a training department before. I've been in a department before where I've had other trainers in front of me, and the difference between what they gave the sales rep or the trainer who was not a first responder and then how they treated me was night and day, because they know, and I don't lead with, hey, I'm a respiratory therapist and I'm a paramedic for blankety years. It comes up through the conversation, or they already know me that way, or because my area was so tight, a lot of people knew me and knew who I was because they saw me at the hospital. The amount of respect that is given to a first responder because they know you've been there and it's just how it is. But it's understandable. A lot of us, we want to know that we're being trained by someone who's been there and done that, or has that background. So it's very important, I think, to spread that word of getting first responders to be. I've had a couple people on my podcast that were first responders of some sort of police officer who turned into a therapist, and now that's all he does, and he only sees family members and first responders or first responders and family members of first responders. So I think it's a growing field. I know that there's a few other people out there that are doing the same thing. They're taking their knowledge from what they've learned as a first responder. They've got the desire and the want to become, that next level therapist, and they do that. So hopefully we're growing that portion. And one time I had a conversation with a buddy of mine who said he wasn't having a good time, and I'm like, man, you need to talk to somebody. He's like, no, I don't. I need my peers. And I'm like, you need your peers to drink beer on a Wednesday afternoon at noon? No, come on now, time out. That we're having fun. We're not getting into drunkenness, but this isn't really what you need on a daily basis. You need someone to help guide you through the process of what you're dealing with. And he's like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. I'm like, and we can find someone who's a first responder who can help you do that. And he's like, yeah, that'd be much better. So I've already lived it already, where I've given support to someone who is literally says, no, I just need my people. And it's just like the veterans, why the VAs came about, why those why those places come about, because they're reliving their trauma and they feel alive again instead of dread. And that's written. That is stuff that is inside of books, that is inside of studies, that the reason why we want to be around our peers when we don't have true help is because we get that rush again and we feel like we're worthy again because we're being around our peers. So,
and I run a group of first responders up here in Massachusetts, and tell you that I've done it before. I started this one in April, and the greatest thing in the world is I'm up to a point where I go, hey, anybody want to talk about something? And of course they're first responders, so once they feel comfortable with each other, they start blurting out everything. And I'm there to kind of give them, here's where maybe a cognitive distortion, that I got to do my job, right? But I literally let them run the show, and they actually,
Gotcha.
They love it. And the other thing I'm very careful of, you're from Worcester County, and there's another Worcester County person. And I said, well, you can go to the other group, but you can't be in the same group, because as much as I do, gossip is also a big old thing.
Right.
My first rule is I tell everyone, if you talk about anything in here, even jokingly, you no longer are invited here.
Yeah.
Most guys actually support that, respect that, and all of them like, oh, so you're used to the gossip. I'm like, yes. Again, I sat in your department, so I know how it is.
Right. Exactly.
So I think that's the other part too. Is if you find someone you said to talk about who's a first responder, sometimes it's just having someone who's not in your town, in your county, in your whatever, and just talk about it, because what happens in one town is different than the other.
Well, and what's great too is with the internet and Zoom calls, or Riverside FM phone calls, like we're on right now, you have now infinite amount of people that could probably help you. You just got to you could find someone that has that option of, yes, I also am approved to do telehealth or teletherapy, and you don't even have to be talking to someone or guided with someone that's in your area. You can have someone that's completely separate. They have no clue who anybody is in that area. And that's actually kind of what I presented to my buddy, and he's like, yeah, that's actually, yeah, let's do that. So this was I'm not sure where it stands. I have to circle back with him. I know he's out of town for the last couple of weeks, but it's one of those things where those are options now with this new technology in this new world, and which it's a no-brainer if you want to keep it nice and quiet and to yourself and get help outside of your general area, you can do that. It's not a problem. Real quick, tell us how to get a hold of you. You mentioned your website. Go ahead and tell us what it is. Tell us your what your ats are at Instagram and all that stuff.
So most of my hats are real Steve Bisson,
Okay.
Bisson or Bison. And my website is steve-bison.com. And I can adapt. I'm an American now. I'm good at adapting. But, I prefer Bisson just to honor my roots and where I come from because English is my second language. So
Okay.
I try to fake it really well, though.
Yeah, you don't have an accent that you're French speaking, so.
Yeah, no, and just to also mention, like that's why like the group for me is Zoom available. People want to join the group, let me know. You don't need to be in Massachusetts or the Northeast. I want to be in a group in Washington and you want to join my group, go on. You're in Ohio, please come.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, Steve, we'll put all that information in the description as well. Thank you so much for coming on the Elevate podcast. We appreciate it. We appreciate your time and your effort and everything you do for the first responders. And don't hesitate to reach out to Steve if something strikes you as needing anything. And don't forget to share this if you feel that any of the information today that was given out is something that maybe someone should hear. Don't forget to just hit that share button on whatever platform you're watching it on. Thanks so much, Steve. We'll talk to you later. That's a wrap for this episode of Elevate, brought to you by Frontline Empowerment Solutions, your partner in building resilience and fostering continued growth. If you found something valuable today, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who could use it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our next conversation. We're here to bring you more stories and insights, all aimed at strengthening the first responder community. Together, let's keep elevating each other, one episode at a time.